What's going on, guys? It's Fight Season MMA, and today I want to make a video talking about let's rank the lightweight division. There is only currently one top 15 lightweight fight happening currently, and that is the main event of UFC Paris on September 28th, I believe, and that is Renato Moicano versus Benoit Saint Denis. And other than that, there is no scheduled fight inside the lightweight division currently. So I want to make a video just talking about some possible fights that I think that should happen inside this lightweight division, and we'll go down and break down every fighter in the division one way or the other. We'll eventually hit them, whether it's starting off because we're going to go top to bottom, or if that matchup makes sense. But if you guys enjoy the UFC content, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That is the best way to help the channel. But also, while you're down there, turn on the post notifications and leave a like just so you help support the channel that much more. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers, so going down there and absolutely smashing the subscribe button would help so much in letting us reach that 1,000 subscriber mark. But let's jump right into the video of matchmaking the current lightweight division in the top 15. So the champion of the UFC lightweight division is Islam Makhachev, who is an absolute monster of a fighter. He's the pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the UFC organization, which means that he is the best fighter in the UFC if you translate his skills pound for pound. But who is Islam Makhachev's next title defense? Because I don't think he has the right opportunity to go up right now to fight someone like Belal Muhammad. Rather, I don't think he would ever fight Belal Muhammad because they've trained together in the same gym at Eagle MMA in Makhachev, Russia, which is a very prestigious camp under Khabib Nurmagomedov at Eagle MMA. But Islam Makhachev, I think his next opponent is going to be Arman Tsarukyan. Arman Tsarukyan just beat Charles Oliveira at UFC 300 in a very interesting and intense fight going down in one of the closest fights of the year, truly, because that fight was truly so fun to watch. You looked at the submission attempts by Charles Oliveira. You look at the punching and the ground control by Arman Tsarukyan. It was a true back and forth, round-to-round war with ultimately, I think they got the decision right with Arman Tsarukyan winning that one. But how does a fight between Islam and Arman go? I think this fight will either happen in early January next year or in February of 2025, where I do think that Islam Makhachev is going to ultimately get the win. I do think that Islam Makhachev, being just so much bigger than Arman, a lot stronger, has a lot better striking than Arman. Now, the grappling is going to be about the same, but Islam just has those trips and that type of technique that's going to really help him in that space. I think that Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan is the fight to make. I think that's the fight that the UFC is targeting, and I think will happen by the end or the start of 2025, either in the main event of UFC 311 or UFC 312. As we all know, Charles Oliveira is the #2 ranked UFC lightweight, where he just came off a very nail-biting loss to Arman Tsarukyan at UFC 300. And who should Charles Oliveira's next opponent be? And I think I got the perfect person to match him up with. The now top 5 contender, just winning this weekend at UFC 305, that being Dan the Hangman Hooker. Dan Hooker is an absolute savage in the UFC, and this man just beat Mateusz Gamrot, who was kind of on a tear. He beat Rafael Dos Santos. He beat Rafael Fiziev, which, if you've watched that fight, he didn't really win. Fiziev tore his ACL, and he beat Jalen Turner in a very close fight, which I also thought that Turner won. But he did beat Mateusz Gamrot at UFC 305, pushing Dan Hooker up into the #5 slot in the lightweight ranking. So I think that a fight between Charles "DuBronx" Oliveira and Dan Hooker would be an absolutely amazing fight to be had. Also, Charles Oliveira can get back at Dan Hooker for calling him Charlie Olives. That was a funny thing that happened. That's a little bit of backstory between these two. Dan Hooker was the first individual to say that Charlie Olives was Charles Oliveira. But I do think that the Hangman versus DuBronx would be a very fun fight in the UFC lightweight division, and I think it should happen sometime, maybe at the UFC 310 card in December, or maybe the UFC 311 card in January of next year, depending on how badly hurt Dan Hooker is, because as we all know, he had to take a little bit of time off after that Jalen Turner fight because he fractured his orbital as well as fracturing his arm. So I think that you give Dan Hooker a little bit of time off, but you get him back in the octagon prior to year's end. And for Justin Gaethje, I think that the only fight to make is the rematch with Dustin Poirier for the 3rd time. Dustin Poirier has one last fight inside the UFC, he has said, and he wants to go out with a banger. These two individuals are 1-1 against one another, and I think that that is the best thing to do as the main event of a possible upcoming UFC card. I think that Justin Gaethje versus Dustin Poirier is a car crash waiting to happen. That's what these two individuals were saying into the lead-up of 291, which ultimately it was a car crash waiting to happen. Justin Gaethje's foot absolutely head kick KO'd Dustin Poirier in that second round very early on in the fight. I was so disappointed when that happened because I wanted to see these two individuals go for a 5-round war at the Delta Center in Salt Lake City, Utah. But I do think that this is the most it's the most logical fight for these two individuals. They are 1-1 against each other. This is a fight that, yes, for Justin Gaethje, if he wins, automatically puts him back into title contention because, as we all saw, Dustin Poirier just went toe-to-toe with Islam Makhachev at UFC 302. And if Dustin Poirier wants to make a next run at the title shot, I think a win over Justin Gaethje again would be a great starting point. But if not, he can go out on his sword against one of the best lightweights ever and have a trilogy match against Justin the Highlight Gaethje. So Michael Chandler is the number 6 ranked lightweight, and he is in a very interesting position because the fight that could possibly happen is with Conor McGregor, and we all know that Conor McGregor just broke his toe. He's aiming for UFC 310 in December, so we could ultimately see that card occur with headlined by McGregor v Chandler, which was targeted for UFC 303, but ended up McGregor broke his toe, like I said, and was swapped for Pereira Prohaska too. But I could 100% see if Michael Chandler doesn't fight Conor McGregor and wants to step back into the octagon, taking on the test of Gathjae Fiziev. That would be such a fun fight to do in the UFC. I think that Gathjae Fiziev is someone who is so entertaining. He just lost to Matthäus Gamrot, but was piecing him up in that first round after in the second round tearing his ACL in an incredible fashion. Prior to that, he went toe-to-toe with Justin Gaethje, who, as we all know, just lost to Max Holloway for the BMF title, but also absolutely smoked some other individuals like Dustin Poirier. So I do think that Gathjae Fiziev is on that level as one of the best lightweights in the UFC currently, and I think that a fight with Michael Chandler, if Conor McGregor isn't an option on the table, would be a very interesting one to occur. Beneil Dariush is sitting out of the UFC for a little bit because he got absolutely destroyed by Arman Tsarukyan in the main event of UFC Austin last year in an absolute crazy fashion where I thought it was a knee, but it was a punch right to the face, knocking Beneil out cold. But this matchup goes with the current fight schedule to where I think Beneil Dariush should face the winner of Renato Moicano and Benoit Saint-Denis. These two individuals are very good. Renato's kind of a grappler, with Benoit is a French Marine or Special Forces member, where he is absolutely a savage in there. So I think that this fight isn't going to go the distance. Either Renato is going to get the finish via submission or ground and pound, or Benoit is going to knock out Renato Moicano cold. So I think that the next step for those two individuals would be fighting someone like Beneil Dariush. He's an older UFC veteran. He's fought the likes of Charles Oliveira. He beat Matthäus Gamrot in a great win. He's fought some people like Arman Tsarukyan too, which he lost in incredible fashion, but he is one of the fighters who is a great stepping stone for someone like Renato Moicano or Benoit Saint-Denis, and should ultimately be the pathway for the winner of UFC Paris to fight Beneil Dariush sometime probably in the start of next year or prior to this year's ending at either UFC Tampa as the main event or at UFC 310. Okay, so Matthäus Gamrot is ranked number 8 in the UFC lightweight division. I think that you jump Paddy Pimblett to Matthäus Gamrot. I think that it is the perfect fight. The only other fight that I could see is if Renato Moicano beats Benoit Saint-Denis at UFC Paris or loses to him, you chug Paddy Pimblett to him if Renato really wants him. But I do think that you should make the fight of Paddy Pimblett versus Matthäus Gamrot. Gamrot's coming off a loss. He's a great test for the top 10. He's kind of a gatekeeper of that top 10 area in the UFC lightweight division, and truly would be a great test for Paddy Pimblett. Gamrot has a lot of cardio. He's got good grappling skills, but he's not the greatest on the feet. And I think that Paddy Pimblett could have a very hard time with Gamrot, but it would be a great test to be had. And this could headline a European event possibly happening. Gamrot's Polish. Paddy's he's British. I think this would be a very fun fight to be had, and Paddy Pimblett deserves a shot into the top 10 after smashing Bobby Green at UFC 304 by one of the stupidest moves I've ever seen in a UFC fighter, by Bobby Green charging into a Paddy Pimblett and ultimately getting the arm triangle and the arm bar in that specific situation. But I do think that Gamrot versus Pimblett is a great fight to make in the UFC lightweight division after Pimblett's win and Gamrot's loss at UFC 305. And the last fighter who I have not talked about in the UFC top 15 rankings for lightweights is Jalen Turner. Jalen Turner should fight someone like Jean Silva if he's going to stay at lightweight. If he's not going to stay at lightweight, he just should fight an up-and-coming prospect who's ready to go jump into the top 15. Jalen Turner is one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC. He knocked out Bobby Green, and he's been in some incredibly close matchups with some of these fighters like Dan Hooker, Matthäus Gamrot, and Renato Moicano. But ultimately, Jalen Turner is kind of at the bottom 14. He is 1-3 in his last 4. He should take his next opponent, someone who is right outside the lightweight rankings, and allow him to give them a shot to jump into the top 15. But I do think that Jalen Turner would end up winning that fight. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fights is MMA, and please let me know what you think about these top 15 lightweight ranking matchups. I think that there are some amazing fights in here. Obviously, we got Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan, which is next for the lightweight title. We got Charles Oliveira versus Dan Hooker in a #1 contender match. I think that was an amazing fight. Dustin Poirier going up against Justin Gaethje for Dustin Poirier's last fight. You got Michael Chandler versus Rafael Fiziev in an absolute dog fight, and you got some other fights like Beneil Dariush facing the winner of the UFC Paris main event, that being Renato Moicano and Benoit Saint Denis. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fights is MMA, and please hit that subscribe button. It is the best way to help and support the channel to the greatest ability. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers, and it would absolutely make my day if you could hit the subscribe button. And while you're down there, turn on the post notifications so you don't miss a video, and hit the like button just so you guys can show even more support onto the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fights is MMA, and I will catch you guys very, very soon with UFC content and news.